One Union private at Fort Pillow who survived the massacre by playing dead under a dead comrade, then testified before Congress and watched the report get filed and forgotten, is a hell of a thing to be. But standing here in this kitchen while my coffee goes cold, I realize the only thing harder than surviving that day was having to explain it to men who weren't there to smell the sulfur and the rot. I wasn't always a man who checked his back door twice before turning off the lights, or a man who flinched when a car backfired on Main Street. Before the enlistment, before the blue wool turned stiff with blood and mud, I was just a boy from a limestone town in Kentucky, where the biggest worry was whether the tobacco harvest would come in before the frost took the leaves. We had a porch with a swing that creaked in the key of C-sharp, and my mother used to hum hymns while she patched my work shirts, and I thought the world was a wide, steady place that stayed right where you left it. I wanted to see the horizon move. I wanted to be part of something that moved the needle of history, because sitting in that field behind a plow, watching the same blackbirds circle the same oak tree every day, felt like being buried alive in small-town certainty. I enlisted with a grin, thinking of bugles and bright uniforms, and the kind of glory that felt like a hot meal on a cold night. But God, I didn't know then that glory is just a name people give to the things they couldn't bring themselves to apologize for. I remember the train ride to the rendezvous point. We were loud then. We were arrogant in our youth, shouting songs out the windows and betting our paychecks on card games played on upturned crates. We were a collection of farmers, clerks, and blacksmiths, all of us convinced that we were the heroes of a story that was already halfway written. I sat next to a boy named Elias who had a pocket watch that stopped exactly at midnight, and he used to hold it to his ear like he was listening to the heartbeat of a ghost. We laughed about it, we made jokes that wouldn't hold up in a graveyard, but they kept us tethered to the living for a few more weeks. I look back on that boy I was, the one who thought he was going to march his way into a statue, and I want to reach through the years and shake him. I want to tell him that he should have stayed on that porch, that the swing sounded better than the screaming, that some things you see are not meant to be held in your head for the rest of your life. But I don't say it. I just stir my coffee and watch the steam rise, thin and gray like the smoke that hung over the Mississippi that April afternoon. Fort Pillow was supposed to be a garrison, a place to hold, a place to wait. It sat high on the bluffs, the river churning dark and thick below, the sky that morning so blue it felt like a lie. We were tired. We were perpetually hungry, our bellies full of hardtack that could break a tooth if you didn't soak it in river water first, but we were holding. You find a strange kind of comfort in the monotony of a post. You learn the specific rhythm of your unit, the way Sergeant Miller would tap his pipe against his boot when he was nervous, the way we'd trade tobacco for dry socks like it was gold. I thought I knew what courage was. I thought it was standing tall when the line was drawn. I didn't realize that courage is just the hollow space between terror and the next breath. We were laughing that morning, joking about who would get the first furlough, someone talking about a girl back in Tennessee who made apple pie that could make a man cry, and I remember thinking that even here, with the war breathing down our necks, we were okay. That was the last piece of the boy I was. I left it on that bluff. The transition from peace to hell doesn't happen with a roar, it happens with a snap. It started with a silence, that heavy, unnatural stillness where the birds stop singing and the air gets thick enough to taste. We were at the parapet, our rifles heavy in our hands, and then the world just folded in on itself. It wasn't like the books. There was no grand charge, no swelling music. There was just the sudden, sickening realization that the wall wasn't going to hold, and the men coming over it were not interested in any rules of engagement I had ever been taught. I saw Miller go down, his pipe still in his hand, a look of profound surprise on his face that stayed there even after he hit the dirt. I didn't think I couldn't think. My body just took over, moving with a cold, frantic instinct that I didn't know I possessed. I slid into a depression in the earth, a trench that was already slick with something that smelled like iron and wet copper, and that's when I saw him, a comrade, a boy I'd shared a canteen with only an hour before, his eyes staring at nothing. I didn't think about it. I didn't weigh the morality of it. I crawled beneath him, pulling his heavy, cooling weight over my shoulders like a shroud, and I held my breath until my lungs felt like they were made of hot glass. The sounds of that hour are etched into my marrow. The wet thud of steel, the voices of men who had stopped being human and had become something else entirely, the screams that started high and jagged and then cut off sharp and sudden. I lay there trapped in that darkness under a man who had been my friend, breathing in the smell of the earth and the copper of his blood, and I prayed, not for my soul, but for my lungs to stop needing air, for my heart to stop beating so loud that they could hear it through the grass. A shadow fell over me, and a boot pressed into the dirt inches from my face, the leather caked in the same red mud I was lying in. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I became a stone. I became a root. I became a part of the carnage, a ghost in the making, waiting for the world to turn back into something recognizable. The horror wasn't just in what they were doing to the others. It was in the total absence of pity, the way a man could kill and then stop to wipe his blade on a pant leg like he was cleaning a tool in a shed. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe days. Time loses its shape when you're hiding under the dead. When the sun finally began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the fort, I crawled out. I was coated in filth, my clothes stiff, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't lace my boots. I walked past the bodies of men I had eaten with, laughed with, planned a future with, and I didn't feel anything anymore. That was the most terrifying part, the numbness. I looked at the river, wide and indifferent, and I realized that the world didn't care. The sky was still blue, the water still flowed, and I was still standing, which felt like a sin I hadn't yet been charged for. I walked toward the water, my steps heavy, leaving a trail of red in the dust, and I knew then that I would never be clean again, not ever. They sent me to testify, months later, in a room that smelled of furniture, polish, and indifference. I stood there, a young man with old eyes, and I told them everything. I spoke of the bayonets and the screams, the way the air turned black with the smoke of things burning that shouldn't have been burned. I saw them scribbling on their pads, their faces carefully blank, their eyes never meeting mine, as if my words were just data points to be filed away in a drawer and forgotten. One man, a senator with a velvet vest, asked me if I was certain about the details, his voice as dry as parchment, and I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to drag him to that bluff and make him smell the air, make him feel the weight of that body on my back, but I just nodded. I was a veteran. I was a witness. I was a piece of evidence. And when I finished, he thanked me for my service and told me I could go. I walked out into the sunlight of the Capitol, and it felt like I was walking on another planet. I went home, but home was gone. The porch swing was still there. The oak tree still held its blackbirds, but they were strangers to me. My mother looked at me and saw a hollow man, and I looked at her and saw a woman who could never understand that the boy she sent off had been buried in a trench in Tennessee. I stopped talking about it because every time I tried, the words tasted like ash. I kept the report, that little slip of paper they gave me, and I tucked it into a box under my bed. I thought it meant something. I thought it was a record of the truth. But as the years turned over, I realized that the truth is a heavy thing to carry, and nobody else wants to help you hold it. It just sits there gathering dust, a ghost of a story that nobody wants to hear. The silence back home is different than the silence at the fort. Here it's a choice. I go to the market, I nod to the neighbors, I tell them I'm doing fine, and I keep my hands steady. But at night when the house settles and the shadows stretch out across the floor, I'm back there. I'm back in the mud. I'm back under the weight of that boy, waiting for the footsteps to move on. Sometimes I hear the laughter of the men I served with, a sound so clear it hurts, and I have to remind myself that I'm standing in a kitchen in Kentucky and they are all gone. I have a job. I have a life. I have a rhythm that looks like everyone else's, but there is a gap, a space between who I am and who I need to be, and I don't think I can ever bridge it. I look at my hands and I see them stained, even when they're clean. I see the world and I see the scars underneath the grass. I'm telling you this now because the coffee is cold and the night is long, and for the first time, I don't feel like I'm testifying. I feel like I'm finally letting the air out of a sealed room. You don't know what it's like to carry a memory that has no place in the daylight. You walk around, you go to church, you pay your taxes, and all the while, there's a part of you that's still lying in the dirt, waiting for the war to be over. I thought if I told the truth, it would set me free. That's what they tell you, right? Tell the truth and be free. But the truth doesn't set you free. The truth just sets you apart. It puts you in a place where you're always the one who knows what's behind the curtain, and you have to watch everyone else go on pretending that the world is a simple, safe place. Sometimes I think about the men who went with me, the ones who didn't come home, and I feel a guilt so sharp it's like a physical blade. Why me? Why did I get to walk out of that fort and grow old while they stayed in the earth? I didn't do anything better than them. I didn't deserve to survive more than them. It was just a roll of the dice, a bit of luck, a twist of the geography. And that, more than anything, is what I can't explain. How do you explain to a woman who loves you that you're living a life you don't feel like you earned? How do you explain to a neighbor that every time you see a flag, you don't think of freedom, you think of the way it looked when we dropped it, the way it looked when it was being trampled into the red, bloody dust? I don't expect you to understand. I don't even know if I understand, but I needed someone to hear it. Not a reporter, not a politician, not a counselor with a notepad, just someone. The sky outside is beginning to lighten, that pale, bruised color that reminds me of dawn over the Mississippi, and I know I have to go out there and face the day. I have to put on my boots and walk into the world and pretend that I'm just like everyone else. But I'm not. I'm the man who stayed behind. I'm the man who listened to the sound of his own heart and prayed for it to stop. and for the first time in all these years, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being the one who remembers. There was a letter tucked into the pocket of my coat when I left the fort. I found it when I finally changed my clothes days later. It was addressed to his wife, that boy whose name I can't quite bring myself to say out loud yet, but the ink was smeared by the blood that had soaked through the fabric. I never sent it. I didn't know how to explain to her that I had used her husband as a shield. I didn't know how to tell her that his last moments were spent covering a coward. I kept the letter. It's in the box underneath the report. Every year on the anniversary of the day we lost that ground, I take it out and I look at the smudged handwriting, and I wonder what she would have said if she had known the truth. But I never answered it. I never could. I hear a car pull into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires just like it did every morning before the war. That will be my neighbor, heading out for work, probably wondering why my lights are on so early. He'll wave and I'll wave back, and the day will start, and the world will go on as if nothing has changed. But I know the ground is thin. I know the wall is lower than it looks. And I know that tomorrow morning, I'll be sitting here again with another cup of cold coffee, staring at that box, wondering if today is the day I finally burn it all. But I won't. I never do. I'll just keep the history, and I'll keep the guilt, and I'll keep the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will actually listen to what happened before the reports were filed and the world moved on. I remember the way the sergeant looked right before the final push, the way he adjusted his cap and looked at the river like he was trying to memorize the current. He turned to me, his eyes tired but steady, and he whispered something that the wind almost caught, something about how we were going to be remembered, how we were going to make sure the record was straight. He didn't know. He didn't have any idea that the record wouldn't mean a damn thing to anyone who had the power to change it. He thought he was writing history. We were just writing a list of casualties that would be forgotten before the ink was dry, and yet I can still see his face. I can still hear the way he said it. I can still feel the weight of his hand on my shoulder, a promise that we were in this together, right to the end. The sun is coming up now, casting a hard, flat light across the kitchen table. It makes everything look sharper, less forgiving. I should be getting ready for the day, but I'm glued to this chair, the weight of the story finally balanced, even if it's only for a moment. It's strange how you can carry something for so long and think it's going to crush you, and then, the moment you put it down, you find you can stand up just fine. My back hurts, my hands are shaking, but I'm standing, and for now, that's enough. I don't need the glory. I don't need the recognition. I just need to be the one who knows what really happened, the one who saw it all and stayed to tell the tale. There's a knock at the door. It's early. Probably just the delivery man or someone needing help with a jump start. I'll go to the door, I'll open it, and I'll greet them with a smile that's practiced and thin, and I'll go back to being the man they think they know. But there's a part of me, the part that crawled out from under that body and walked away from the river, that will never leave that fort. It'll always be there, sitting in the mud, watching the horizon and waiting for the silence to break. And that's fine. That's just the way it is. You carry the war and you carry the peace, and you hope that in the end, the two of them add up to something that looks like a life. I'm going to go answer that door now, and I'm going to leave this story here on this table where it can finally be still. I'm not saying it's over. I'm just saying that for the first time I think I can handle the weight of it. I'm still here. That's the part they didn't count on. That's the part they forgot to put in the report. I'm still here, and I remember everything. The knock at the door is rhythmic, 2 sharp raps followed by a pause, exactly the way my sergeant used to signal for a check-in during the long, suffocating hours when we were pinned down behind the woodpile. I don't move for a second, my lungs stalling in my chest, as if I've suddenly forgotten how the simple mechanics of breathing work. It's a trick of the mind, isn't it? One moment you're back on that bluff, the smell of damp earth and iron thick in your throat, and the next you're in a kitchen in Kentucky with the linoleum floor cold under your bare feet. I stand up and my joints pop, a dry, brittle sound that seems loud enough to crack the morning silence. I look at the door, the wood grain familiar and solid, and I realize I'm still sweating. A cold, oily slick runs down my spine. I wipe my face with the back of my hand, trying to scrub away the phantom grime, but the skin feels too thin, like it's barely holding everything inside. I don't answer the door, not yet. I walk to the window instead, staying tucked to the side, peering through the gap in the curtains. It's just the delivery truck, a heavy-duty frame rattling as it pulls away, the engine note fading into the distance. It sounds like the rumble of artillery before the dawn barrages, that deep, gut-level vibration that hits you in the marrow long before your ears register the sound. I watch it until it disappears around the bend of the road, and I let out a breath I feel like I've been holding since the day they shipped us out of Louisville. I lean my forehead against the cool glass, the sensation grounding me, pulling me back from the edge of the memory. I was so young back then, barely old enough to shave, with a head full of romantic notions about duty and a heart that didn't know yet that it could be hollowed out and filled with ghosts. We thought we were invincible. That's the greatest lie they ever told us, that because we were young and brave and on the right side of the fight, the world wouldn't dare break us. I think back to the barracks in those early weeks, before the reality of the front lines took the shine off our brass. We were a brotherhood of misfits and dreamers, kids who had grown up watching the trains leave and wanting to be on them. There was a guy named Calloway who slept in the bunk above mine. He had this beat-up harmonica he played when he thought the officers weren't listening, little mournful tunes that sounded like the wind through a cornfield in late October. He used to talk about wanting to open a hardware store back in Ohio, something simple, something with a front door that locked at night and a ledger that only recorded bolts and nails. He was the one who made us laugh until our sides ached, even when the rations were rotten and the mud was waist-deep. We'd sit there in the dark, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and tobacco, and we'd trade stories about home, the way the sun hit the hills in the morning, the taste of blackberries in the valley, the specific silence of a Sunday afternoon. We were so full of life then, a frantic, desperate kind of vitality that I can still feel if I close my eyes tight enough. Calloway would lean over the side of his bunk, his face shadowed, and ask me if I thought we'd be changed by it. I told him we wouldn't. I lied, and I knew I was lying, but it felt like the only currency we had to pay for the future. We weren't supposed to end up at a place like Fort Pillow. It was supposed to be a holding action, a strategic footnote in a ledger that most of the country wouldn't even bother to read. We spent days building up the parapets, digging our own graves in the clay, our shirts permanently stained by the orange-red silt. The work was mindless, grinding, the kind of labor that numbs the soul until you're just a machine with a shovel. But there were moments, those brief, golden pockets of time, where the war felt like a dream we were having in separate beds. I remember a Tuesday, the sky so clear it was like looking into a bowl of blue glass, when we found a small patch of clover growing near the riverbank. Calloway picked a stem and tucked it into his cap, grinning like he'd found a gold nugget. We didn't talk about the enemy. We didn't talk about the rumors that had been filtering down the line. We just sat there, legs dangling over the water, and watched the current carry away the bits of debris that had washed down from the north. It was the last time I saw him look like he belonged in a hardware store. The tension started as a flicker, a subtle shift in the way the officers carried themselves, the way the guards at the perimeter kept their eyes focused on the tree line instead of the river. You learn to read the atmosphere of a camp like an animal reads the weather. When the birds stop, when the chatter dies down to a low, jagged murmur, you know. I remember Sergeant Miller coming down the line that final evening, his face pulled tight, his movements efficient and stripped of all pretense. He didn't give us a speech. He just told us to clean our rifles and make sure our powder was dry. He didn't have to say anything else. We could read the shadow in his eyes. I spent that night sitting with my back against the dirt wall, the stars indifferent and cold above us. I thought about the girl I'd left in the limestone valley, the way she smelled like rain and dried lavender, and I tried to conjure her face, to hold it against the creeping darkness. But the details were already blurring. The war was like a solvent, eating away at the things that made me human, replacing them with a hard, cold efficiency that felt entirely alien. The morning of the attack, the air felt heavy, almost pressurized. I woke up with my mouth tasting of copper, a metallic tang that never really left my tongue, even years later. We were eating, the hardtack crumbled into our tin cups when the first shell landed. It didn't sound like thunder, it sounded like the world being torn open. The ground jumped, a solid, violent jolt that threw me off my feet and into the mud. I remember the sound of Calloway screaming for the medic, a high-pitched, thin sound that cut through the cacophony of incoming fire. I tried to reach him, to pull him toward the shelter of the trench, but the air was filled with shrapnel and dirt, a blinding, chaotic swirl of death. I crawled, dragging my rifle by the strap, my fingers digging into the earth until they bled. I was terrified, not of dying, but of the sudden, total erasure of everything I thought I knew. I reached the spot where he'd been standing, but he was gone, replaced by a crater that smelled like sulfur and cordite. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just kept crawling, my mind a blank white screen of pure survival instinct. That's when the reality of the fort descended. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. I can still see the men in the gray coats coming over the crest of the parapet, their faces obscured by the smoke, their bayonets catching the pale morning light. I saw them descend on the wounded, the indifference in their eyes more terrifying than any hatred. It was the efficiency that haunts me. They worked like farmers clearing a field, a rhythmic, mechanical process that ignored all the rules of humanity we'd been told to believe in. I saw a man someone I'd shared a canteen with during the march from Cairo beg for his life, and I saw the way he was silenced with a single, practiced movement of a blade. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I went into that dark, hollow space where the war lives, and I pressed myself into the blood-soaked earth, pulling the body of a fallen comrade over me like a heavy blanket. The weight was unbearable, the smell of him, the warmth fading into the cold, the way his limp arm fell across my shoulder as if he were trying to pull me into the grave with him. I stayed that way for hours, listening to the world come to an end in screams and steel. The sounds of the massacre are etched into my brain, a loop of audio that plays when I least expect it. The wet, meaty thud of a rifle butt, the gurgling, ragged gasps of men whose throats had been opened, the laughter, that was the part I couldn't handle, the low, casual laughter of men who were doing the unthinkable and treating it like a chore. Every time I hear someone laugh too loudly in a restaurant, or a door slam with a heavy, final sound, I'm back there. I'm back in the mud, beneath the weight of that boy, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I prayed to a God I'd stopped believing in somewhere between the recruitment office and the Mississippi, asking not for salvation, but for the ability to remain invisible. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a soldier. I was a worm in the dirt, a cowardly, terrified thing trying to escape the maw of the Reaper. When the sun finally began to set, the silence that fell over the fort was deeper than death. It was the silence of a house after everyone has left, a hollow, echoing stillness that feels like it's waiting for something to happen. I waited until the shadows had swallowed the blood-stained earth before I dared to move. My legs were stiff, my clothes fused to my skin by the dried slurry of mud and gore. I crawled out from under the body and I didn't even look back at him. I couldn't. If I had looked at his face, I knew I would have snapped. I stood up, my knees buckling, and I walked toward the river, my gait uneven, my eyes fixed on the dark, swirling water. I felt like a ghost, a soul that had been left behind while the rest of the world moved on. The river didn't care. It kept flowing, indifferent and vast, indifferent to the butchery that had just occurred on its banks. I don't know how I made it to the riverbank, or how I spent those next few days. It was a blur of movement and numbness, a dreamlike state where the world felt thin and brittle. I remember being picked up by a patrol, their faces clean, their uniforms stiff and new, and the way they looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and pity. I couldn't tell them what I'd seen. I couldn't speak the words. The vocabulary of the fort wasn't something you could translate into the language of the living. When they brought me to the committee, I tried to give them a testimony, but every sentence felt like a betrayal. I told them about the bayonets. I told them about the lack of quarter, but I left out the feeling of the body on my back. I left out the laughter. How do you quantify the horror of being treated like a piece of livestock? They wrote it down, filed it away, and gave me a transport back to a home that didn't exist anymore. The homecoming was the worst part of all. My mother was waiting at the train station, her face aged, her eyes searching for the boy who had left, but all she found was a stranger in a blue coat. She didn't ask, she didn't have to. She could see the hollow space inside me, the way I flinched when a carriage rumbled past, the way I kept my distance from the other men in town. I tried to go back to the farm, to the rhythm of the plow and the season, but the earth felt wrong under my boots. It felt like the ground at the fort, always waiting for the next strike, always hungry for something I couldn't give. I moved through the days like a clockwork toy, wound up and set to go, but missing the internal gear that made the movement mean anything. I worked, I ate, I slept, or tried to, but I was never really home. I was always back there, under the dirt, waiting for the shadows to shift. I've kept that report in a box under my bed for years, a document that claims to be the truth but only captures the shape of the lie. The committee wanted numbers. They wanted names. They wanted a narrative that they could use for their own purposes, a story of sacrifice and atrocity that served their political machinery. They didn't want the smell of the rot. They didn't want the sound of the bayonets hitting bone. They wanted a clean, tidy version of a messy, disgusting reality. And every time I look at those papers, I feel a surge of rage so intense it makes my hands shake. I didn't survive to be a footnote in their history. I survived to carry the burden of the truth, even if it's a burden I have to hold all by myself. The guilt is a constant companion. It's not a sharp pain anymore. It's a dull, persistent ache that settles in the center of my chest, a reminder that I am here because someone else wasn't. Why me? That's the question that wakes me up in the middle of the night, the one that keeps me staring at the ceiling until the sun starts to crawl over the hills. I didn't do anything better than the men who died on that bluff. I wasn't braver. I wasn't smarter. I was just luckier, and in a war, luck is just another word for the absence of justice. I see Calloway's face sometimes in the mirror, especially in the mornings when the light is just right. I see the same set to the jaw, the same light in the eyes, and I want to tell him I'm sorry. I want to tell him that I'm living the life he didn't get to, the one with the hardware store and the front door that locks, but the words turn to ash in my mouth. I keep a letter in that same box, one that was meant for his family. I never sent it. I didn't know how to tell them that he died in the dirt, surrounded by the screams of his brothers, and that I was the one who crawled away from the spot where he fell. How do you explain that to a mother who's waiting for her boy to come home? How do you tell her that he wasn't a hero in a grand battle, but a casualty of a slaughterhouse? I keep the letter because it's the only thing I have that's real, the only thing that hasn't been filtered through a report or a committee or a political agenda. It's just paper and ink, stained with the truth of what we were. The years have done nothing to soften the edges of the memory. If anything, they've made it sharper, more defined. I see the fort in my dreams, the same smell of damp clay, the same sound of the river rushing past, the same feeling of the earth crushing down on me. I'm always at that moment of impact, always waiting for the world to fold in, always trying to find a way to stay whole when everything around me is falling to pieces. And yet, I keep standing. I keep walking. I keep going through the motions of a life that doesn't feel like my own. It's a strange, lonely kind of existence, being a man who carries a secret that everyone else wants to forget. I hear my neighbor pulling into his drive again, the same crunch of gravel, the same mundane rhythm of a life that hasn't been broken. I find myself wondering if he knows. Does he see the way I hold myself, the way I scan the tree line when I walk to the well? Or does he just see a man who's a little quiet, a little slow to join the conversation? I don't know, and honestly, I don't think I care. I've reached a point where the opinions of the world don't matter as much as the truth of the experience. I've stopped trying to translate it for them. I've stopped trying to make them understand that the war never really ends, it just changes its shape. I walk over to the box under the bed and pull it out. It's a simple wooden crate, the kind that held ammunition once, now holding the fragments of a life that was discarded. I open the lid and the smell hits me, not the smell of the fort, but the smell of old paper and dust, a scent that is dry and brittle and final. I pick up the report, the edges frayed and yellowed, and I read the words, the clinical, detached language of the men who didn't hear the screams. It's so far from the reality that it's almost laughable. They describe the position, the numbers, the outcome, but they miss the soul of the event, the way the air felt when the world broke. I put it back and pick up the letter, the paper still slightly damp from the memory of the blood. I run my thumb over the handwriting, the loops and slants that were so full of life, and I feel a sudden sharp ache in my throat. I should burn it. I should burn the whole box and let the smoke carry it away, but I can't. It's all I have left of the boy I was and the men who went with him. I spend the morning like this, lost in the artifacts of a life I'm not sure I ever lived. The sun reaches the center of the room, and the dust motes dance in the light, a silent, swirling chaos that looks a little bit like the smoke at the fort. I feel a strange, cold peace descend on me. I'm not fixed. I'm not whole. I'm just a man who survived, and that has to be enough. I'm the record of what happened, the living, breathing, shaking account that the reports left out. And for now, that's the only justice I can hope for. I hear the wind pick up outside, rustling the leaves of the oak tree in the yard, and for a split second, I think I hear the sound of a harmonica, a thin, mournful tune that drifts in from somewhere far away. It's just the wind, I know, but I close my eyes and listen, and for that one fleeting moment, I'm back in the barracks, the air thick with tobacco, and Calloway is playing his song. I open my eyes, and the kitchen is empty. The silence is back, a heavy, solid thing that fills the corners of the room. I stand up and walk to the table, the wood scarred and familiar under my palms. I pick up the coffee cup, the ceramic cold and slick, and I drink the last of it, the bitter dregs stinging my tongue. It's enough. I've done my duty. I've borne witness. The rest of the world can go on forgetting, but I'll keep the fire going. I'll keep the history alive in the quiet spaces of my own head. There's a shift in the light, the afternoon sun casting long, golden fingers across the floor. I think about the afternoon, the way the world feels when the shadows start to get long, that particular time when the day is exhausted and the night is waiting to reclaim the earth. I've always hated the twilight. It's the time of day when the memories get restless, when the ghosts start to pace the halls of my mind. But today it feels different. Today I'm not running. I'm just sitting here watching the light fade, and for the first time in years I'm not waiting for the end to arrive. I'm already there. I get up and walk to the back door, stepping out onto the porch. The air is cool, a sharp, clean breeze that smells of damp earth and pine needles. The sky is turning that bruised, purple color that the horizon gets right before the stars come out, and I watch the light die with a calm I didn't think I possessed. The town is quiet, the evening chores winding down, the chimneys beginning to breathe thin ribbons of smoke into the sky. It's a peaceful, sturdy world, the one they tried to build while we were off destroying ourselves. And it's okay. It's okay that they don't know. They weren't meant to know. That's the burden, the one they gave us when they handed us the rifles and told us to go. I see my neighbor walking his dog down the lane, the two of them moving with a slow, contented rhythm that seems so natural it's almost startling. He stops and waves, and I wave back, a small, involuntary movement of the hand. He doesn't come over. He doesn't ask how I'm doing. He just keeps walking, a part of the evening scene, a character in a story that I'm no longer the protagonist of. And that's the realization that finally breaks the tension in my chest. I don't have to be the soldier anymore. The war is over, even if the memory isn't. The battle at the fort has been written, filed, and forgotten, and I'm just a man standing on a porch in Kentucky, waiting for the night to fall. I look at my hands, the knuckles gnarled and stained by the years, the skin mapping the long, slow trek from the bluff to the present. They don't look like the hands of a boy anymore. They look like the hands of a man who's seen the world break and has spent his life trying to glue the pieces back together, one by one. And that's the truth of it, the rebuilding. Not in the way the politicians meant, but in the way a man rebuilds himself after he's been hollowed out. You take the trauma, you take the guilt, you take the memory, and you weave them into the fabric of your everyday life until they aren't separate things anymore. They're just the scars that hold you together. The stars are coming out now, tiny, cold pinpricks of light in a sea of velvet black. They remind me of the way the campfires looked from the riverbank, thousands of little sparks against the darkness, each one a life, each one a story, each one a piece of the puzzle that nobody will ever fully solve. I stand there for a long time, just watching them, feeling the vastness of the universe and the tiny, inconsequential nature of my own existence. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm just a man who stood in the mud and watched the world come to an end, and then, for some reason I'll never understand, I was allowed to walk away. I go back inside and lock the door, the click of the latch final and solid. I don't feel the need to check it again. The shadows in the kitchen don't seem as long, as menacing as they did this morning. They're just shadows, a trick of the light and the architecture of the house. I sit back down at the table, the box still open, the letter and the report staring up at me. I think about what it would be like to just let go, to leave them on the table and walk away, but I can't. They are a part of me as much as my heartbeat or the breath in my lungs. I pick up the box and slide it back under the bed, the wood scraping against the floorboards, a sound of closure. I'm tired now, a deep, heavy exhaustion that settles into my bones. It's the kind of tired that comes after a long, hard shift, the kind of exhaustion that makes the sleep feel earned. I walk to the bedroom, the house quiet and familiar around me, and I lay down on the bed, the mattress soft and welcoming. I close my eyes, and for a moment I think I hear the harmonica again, that thin, mournful tune that sounds like the wind through the cornfields, and I don't fight it. I let it wash over me, a lullaby of ghosts and memories, and I drift off, the war finally silent in the quiet of the night. The morning comes, a soft, gray light that filters through the curtains and paints the room in shades of charcoal and ash. I wake up, the remnants of the dream still clinging to the edges of my mind, and I realize I don't remember the fort. For the first time in years, the morning doesn't start with the sound of the bayonets or the sight of the mud. It starts with the sound of the birds, a soft, rhythmic chirping that marks the beginning of the day. I sit up, my back and shoulders aching, and I take a deep breath, the air clean and empty. I'm still here. That's the truth of it. I'm still here, and the world is still turning, and maybe, just maybe, that's all I ever needed to know. I get up and head to the kitchen, the floor cold under my feet. I start the coffee, the smell of the grounds filling the air, a familiar grounding scent that belongs to this life, this house, this morning. I look out the window at the oak tree, the blackbirds perched in the branches, waiting for the day to begin. They look like they've always been there, steady and unmoving, a part of the landscape that doesn't care about the wars of men. And that's the perspective I've been missing. The world is so much bigger than the fort, so much older than the slaughter, so much more persistent than the memories we carry. I pour a cup, the steam rising in a thin, steady curl, and I sit at the table. I don't check the door. I don't look at the box. I just drink the coffee, the heat spreading through me, a small, tangible comfort in a world that's often cold and indifferent. I look at my hands, the knuckles still gnarled, the skin still scarred, but they don't look stained anymore. They look like the hands of a man who survived, who's carried the truth and lived to tell it, even if the only one listening is the morning light. There's a knock at the door, the same rhythmic double rap as before. I don't flinch. I don't stop breathing. I just set the cup down, stand up, and walk to the door, the movement steady and calm. I open it, and it's just the mailman, a man I've known for years, his face weathered by the sun, his eyes kind and tired. He hands me a bundle of letters, a smile on his face, and he says something about the weather, a brief, pleasant comment that connects us in the reality of the day. I thank him, take the mail, and close the door, the latch snapping shut with a firm, final click. I walk back to the table, the letters in my hand, and I see one that stands out, a letter from a government office, the return address heavy with the weight of the past. I know what it is. It's another report, another update on the status of the veterans, another attempt to categorize and file the experiences that don't fit into the neat little boxes they've created. I look at it for a long time, the paper white and sterile, and then, without a second thought, I drop it into the trash. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't capture the truth. It's just another piece of paper in a world that's obsessed with documentation. I sit back down and finish my coffee, the heat still in my chest. The day is unfolding, the house settling into the rhythm of the hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky. I feel a strange, quiet sense of freedom, a weightless feeling that I haven't known in decades. I don't have to carry the fort anymore. I don't have to defend it. I don't have to testify for it. I just have to be here in the middle of the day, in the middle of the world, a man who survived the fire and found his way back to the light. I think about the letter from Calloway's family, the one I never sent. I go to the bedroom, pull the box out, and take the letter out. I walk back to the kitchen, find a piece of paper and a pen, and I sit at the table. I don't try to explain everything. I don't try to make it right. I just write the truth, that he was a good man, that he had a song in his heart, and that he was never forgotten. I put it in an envelope, address it to the town in Ohio, and I walk to the door. I'll take it to the post office this afternoon. It's a small thing, a simple act, but it feels like the final piece of the puzzle. The wind is blowing, the trees in the yard swaying in the rhythm of the day. I step outside and breathe in the air, the world around me so vibrant and alive that it feels like a miracle. I think about all the years I spent hiding in the dark, the energy I wasted trying to protect a memory that didn't need to be protected. The truth isn't something you keep in a box. It's something you share, something you pass on, something you let go of so that you can finally start to heal. And today, I'm finally beginning. I walk down the lane, the gravel crunching under my feet, the sun warm on my shoulders. I see my neighbor in his garden, his hands deep in the soil, and I stop and talk to him for a while, the conversation easy and natural, the kind of talk that belongs to two men living in a world that's at peace. I'm not the man who crawled out of that fort. I'm not the boy who went to the war. I'm something else, something built from the pieces of the past, and that, I'm starting to think, is the most important thing of all. I'm standing here under the open sky, and for the first time, I'm not waiting for anything. I'm just here, and that is enough. The morning air in Kentucky has a way of settling into your lungs that makes you feel like you're breathing in the very heart of the country, crisp and smelling faintly of the limestone caves that run deep beneath these hills. I walk down to the mailbox, the gravel under my boots sounding exactly like it has every day for the last 30 years, a steady, rhythmic crunch that grounds me in the present. My knees don't mind the walk as much as they used to, or maybe I've just learned to favor them, a small compromise I've made with my own body in this long truce we've called. The sun is just starting to burn through the mist, turning the fields into a sea of gold and gray, and for a moment, I stop to watch a red-tailed hawk circling high above the tree line. It's a quiet, perfect kind of day, the kind of day that feels like a gift you didn't quite earn, but decided to accept anyway. I reach the mailbox, the metal cold and slightly rusted, and I pull out the bundle of circulars and letters, my hands steady. The tremors that used to plague my mornings long since faded into a distant, manageable hum. I think back to the flight home, sitting in the cramped, freezing belly of that transport plane, surrounded by guys who were trying their best to look like they hadn't just watched the world end. We were silent, that heavy, thick silence that hangs over men who have seen things that refuse to be put into words. I remember looking at the guy sitting across from me, his eyes fixed on the vibrating floorboards, his hands clenched so tight on his knees that his knuckles were white as bone. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We were all carrying the same invisible weight, a phantom load that would press against our chests for the rest of our lives. I spent that flight trying to imagine the smell of my mother's kitchen, the scent of yeast and floor wax, trying to rebuild the reality of home in my mind before we touched down on American soil. I was terrified. I was afraid that when I stepped off that plane, the person who had left would be gone, replaced by someone I wouldn't recognize in the mirror. And in a way, I was right. The boy who left for the war had died in that mud, and the man who walked down the ramp was a stranger to everyone, including myself. When I finally walked through the sliding glass doors of the airport terminal, the blast of conditioned air felt like a physical blow. I saw my wife standing near the baggage claim, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly over her purse. The moment she saw me, the way her entire body seemed to sag with relief, it's a memory that still makes my throat tighten, even now. She ran to me, and the hug was everything I'd dreamed of in those long, God-forsaken nights in the trench. But when she pulled back to look at my face, I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She was looking for the version of me she'd sent away, the one who laughed at bad jokes and didn't check the exits the second he walked into a room. She didn't find him. She found me, and I was a hollowed-out shell, a man who had left his soul behind in the clay of the fort. We drove home in silence, the radio playing some lo-fi country song that sounded like it was coming from another planet, and when we finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked like a movie set, beautiful and perfect, and entirely wrong. The first night in my own bed was a nightmare of hypervigilance. I laid there in the dark, the rhythm of my wife's breathing beside me, a sound that I kept trying to sync my own ragged pulse to, but every creak of the floorboards outside the door made my heart stop. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my muscles coiled, my mind running through every possible scenario for an ambush in my own hallway. When morning came, I didn't want to get up. I wanted to stay in the sanctuary of the blankets, away from the terrifying normalcy of sunlight and the expectation that I should be happy to be back. I walked into the kitchen and found my wife making coffee, the smell of it hitting me like a physical punch. She turned and smiled, a hesitant, fragile expression, and I tried to smile back, but I think I just looked like I was in pain. I sat at the table and watched her move around the room, a creature of soft edges and light, and I felt a million miles away, a ghost haunting the life I was supposed to be living. It took years to find a middle ground, to learn how to exist in the same room as my own life. There were dinners where I'd sit for an hour without saying a word, the sound of the silverware against the plates sounding like incoming fire. There were nights when I'd wake up soaked in sweat, screaming, the phantom smell of cordite thick in the air, and I'd have to go out onto the porch and sit in the dark until the dawn took the edge off the panic. I tried the VA, but the men in the waiting rooms were all the same, hollow-eyed, restless, shifting in their chairs as if the floor was made of glass. We didn't talk about the horror. We talked about the weather, the government, the price of corn, anything to avoid looking at the jagged holes in each other. I eventually stopped going. I realized that the healing, if you could call it that, wasn't something you could get from a doctor or a government form. It was something you had to build, piece by piece, like mending a broken fence. I started working with my hands, really working. I bought a lathe and started turning wood, the scent of cedar and walnut filling the shop, the repetitive, rhythmic motion of the tool against the grain the only thing that could quiet the noise in my head. There was something about the wood, the way it had its own history, its own scars, the way it could be shaped and smoothed until the damage became part of the design, that saved me. I'd spend hours out there, the dust settling on my skin, the world outside ceasing to exist as I focused on the curve of a bowl or the finish of a handle. It was a meditative state, a way to anchor my soul to the earth, to prove to myself that I could create something beautiful from the raw, splintered mess of reality. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped scanning the tree line. I learned to let the quiet be quiet and not a precursor to some unseen violence. The guilt, though, that never really goes away. It just changes its weight. It's like carrying a heavy pack on a long march. Eventually, your back gets used to the load, your muscles adapt to the strain, but the weight is always there, reminding you of the miles you've walked and the men who didn't make it to the end of the road. I see them in my dreams, not as the broken, suffering things they were at the end, but as they were before the world went sideways, laughing, complaining about the rations, talking about their girls back home, eyes bright with the hope of a future that never arrived. I've made my peace with the fact that I'm the one who stayed, but I haven't made my peace with why. That's the question that will follow me to the grave, and I've learned to stop asking it. Some things aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be lived with, integrated, woven into the person you become so that you can keep moving forward. I think of my life now, the simple, sturdy reality of it, and I feel a profound sense of gratitude that I didn't expect to find. I have a porch that overlooks a valley that never sees a fight. I have a wife who stuck by me through the years when I was more ghost than man, and who understands the silences better than I ever could. I have a grandson who asks me about the war, not because he wants the horror, but because he wants to know who his grandfather is. And when I tell him, I don't give him the reports or the committee's sanitized version of history. I tell him about the clover by the river, the way Calloway used to play that harmonica, the feeling of the morning sun on our backs before everything changed. I keep the darkness for myself, and I share the light with him, because that's the only way to make sure the past doesn't end up being all we leave behind. I still have that box under the bed, but I don't need to check it anymore. I know what's inside, the paper, the ink, the fragmented record of a time that feels both like yesterday and like 1,000 years ago. I don't feel the need to burn it, but I don't feel the need to look at it either. It's a part of my story, a chapter that's been written and closed. I'm living in a different book now, one that's still being written, one that has room for joy and peace and the simple, quiet beauty of a morning in Kentucky. I've realized that being a survivor isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing what you're going to remember and how you're going to use that memory to keep the present alive. Sometimes, when the light is just right in the late afternoon, I'll sit on the porch and think about the men who didn't come home. I don't do it with sadness anymore. I do it with a sort of quiet, steady pride. They were good men. They deserved better than what they got, but they were there, and they were brave, and they held the line when the world was coming apart at the seams. I carry them with me, not as ghosts that haunt the halls, but as the quiet foundation of everything I am. I'm the living, breathing evidence that even after the worst happens, you can still stand up, walk forward, and find something resembling a life again. And that, I think, is the greatest service I could ever perform for them. The mailman's truck pulls away, the sound fading into the distance, and the house settles into the familiar, comforting hum of the midday. I walk back toward the porch, my stride steady, my breath even. I'm looking forward to the afternoon. The wood in the shop is waiting, the grain is fine, and I've got a project that needs a steady hand and a clear mind. It's a good day to work. It's a good day to be here. I stop at the screen door and look back at the valley once more, the sunlight turning everything into a painting that's almost too beautiful to be real. I think about the boy I was at 19, so full of certainty and fear, and I wish I could tell him that it's going to be okay. I wish I could tell him that the world will break him, but that the pieces will come back together. Different, yes, but stronger in the places where the cracks used to be. I can't tell him that, of course, but I can live it. I go inside, the house cool and dim after the bright heat of the morning. I don't look back at the mailbox or the valley or the past. I walk straight to the kitchen, the linoleum floor solid and real under my feet, and I reach for the handle of the woodshop door. Life isn't a straight line, and it certainly isn't a clean one. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it leaves you with things you'll never quite be able to explain, but it's still here. It's still ours. I push the door open, the scent of sawdust and fresh timber rushing out to greet me, and I take a deep, slow breath, finally ready to start the day. The sunlight follows me inside, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into a shimmering, shifting path that leads straight to the workbench. I pick up the chisel, the steel cool and weighted in my palm, and I set to work, the rhythm of the blade cutting into the wood steady and sure, a heartbeat of labor in a house that is finally, truly mine. Everything that happened, everything I lost, and everything I kept, it all feeds into this, the quiet, focused act of making something new from the wreckage of the old. There are no maps for this, no manuals, just the work and the time, and the stubborn, beautiful fact that I am still standing here. After all these years, the only thing that really matters is that you keep moving until the light finally finds its way all the way through the cracks.